Hey everybody, Dimitri here, and in this video I want to compare the protection level of these four boots. Now the only reason that I have these four boots here is that's the boots that I personally have. And if you're like me, anytime you go to buy something, you scour the internet for video reviews and things like that. And something that I found particularly hard specifically with boots is to find information on the relative level of protection between the different models. A lot of times the reviews focus on features. They'll say very protective or just use kind of a very general term to describe how protective a boot is. So maybe you have one of these boots already and you're looking for something different, and I'll just use my own situation as an example here. I already had SG12s for riding off-road and I wanted something waterproof. So I started looking at adventure boots, and it was very unclear to me how much protection I would lose with this Sidi Adventure or with an AlpineStars Tech7 Drystar. I will give a lot of credit to Brett Tax and Atomic Moto, Brian there. They do some really in-depth and very well thought out boot reviews and videos on boots specifically. So that's probably the best resource on the internet. So this video is going to focus pretty much exclusively on protection, but I will just quickly mention that all four of these boots are really good at what they do. The Sidis are very good adventure boots. They're very comfortable, they're waterproof, they're great to walk in. And the three Moto Enduro boots are very comfortable on the bike. They let me control the bike really well. Great shift feel, great brake feel. And I could pick any of these three boots as far as bike feel, comfort-wise, any day and be equally happy personally. Obviously everybody's feet are different, so there are some rider specific preferences there. Alright, so I'm gonna start with an honorable mention for those of you who don't wear motorcycle specific footwear when you're riding, especially off-road. This is a Ariat work boot. I really like it. I use it all the time for work, working on bikes, working on cars, stuff like that. And it's got some structure to it, but this has pretty much zero protection. So typically the kind of things that you'll have happen to you on a motorcycle, especially off-road, is you might hit a stump with your foot. Not going to be good. There's pretty much no protection for your toes. So if you hit something with the top of the foot, not good. If you have a motorcycle fall on you, also not good. Zero crush protection. You can pretty much smush this thing every which way. So you have a bike land on you, bam, just floppy. No protection at all. Ankle's got a little bit, it feels like a cardboard box. That's probably actually what's in there. I'm guessing it's maybe a little bit of cardboard. It's not going to do much. You have a foot peg hit you right here. Maybe a little bit protection, but not much. The sole is super soft. This midsole is actually not terrible here, but it's still pretty soft. So very little protection. Obviously no shin protection or anything like that. If you hit your shin on a foot peg or a stick or kickstarting your bike or something like that, there's nothing protecting you here. So very little protection here. All right, so if you had kind of a spectrum of protection, you have the Gaerne and the Leatt all the way at the most protective side. And then you have a little bit of a gap to the Tech7, which is kind of in the middle. Then you have a little bit of a gap to the Sidi Adventure. And then you have a really big gap to the cowboy boot, which is not very protective at all for riding a bike. Alright, so I'll start here with what I think is the most protective boot, which is the Gaerne SG12, widely considered to be the most protective. So what makes it really, really protective? First of all, this is all hard plastic. So if you have a bike fall on the top of your foot, you really can't smush it at all. The whole front to top of the foot is pretty much encased in hard plastic. This plastic on the side, kind of surrounding your ankle, also hard plastic, and it's very thick, very dense. You can't crush this with your hands at all. There's just no movement. Same thing on the opposite side. This area in general I find is kind of lax on a lot of boots. This is hard plastic, and this gets hit a lot by foot pegs. You can see this is all chewed up from foot peg hits, especially if you're falling down. If you're doing hard enduro, a lot of times you'll have your bike land on this side of your foot with your leg kind of stuck underneath the bike. So all kinds of pointy bits are going to try to hit you anywhere here. And the top of your foot is pretty meaty, so it doesn't really hurt. But where you have ankle bones and other stuff sticking out, it's really good to not have metal bits hit you there. So this is hard plastic, super protective. The sole is super hard, so there's no way any of this is flexing. So if you run your foot into something, your foot's not going to get crushed or folded. So it's super protective there. The top part of the boot is also all the way around is all hard plastic. This is very hard plastic, so a lot of impact protection here. The inside of the boot is going to be kind of hard to see, but Gaerne has really good memory foam inside of it, which I think separates it from Sidi in that there's more padding inside. And padding is really good to actually absorb the impact. So hard plastics works really well to spread the impact out, but you actually need some sort of padding to actually absorb it. So the fact that there's a bunch of memory foam inside makes it super comfortable, plus it makes it so that there's something to actually absorb the hits. So ankle protection is really good on this boot. You pretty much can't squish it this way. I'm trying and I can't because there's a hinged element here so that it doesn't allow the boot to flex in either direction. I actually have to put a lot of effort to even move it this way. And despite that, when you put it on and you flex your ankle, you actually have a really good flexibility in the ankle because this is hinged. And what that does also is it doesn't cause any sort of bunching in this area, which allows them to use much thicker plastic, as opposed to some other boots where they will have kind of a hinge, and we'll see that on the AlpineStars actually. But the way that they get flexibility through here is by just using much thinner plastic, so the plastic itself will actually flex, not so much a mechanical hinge. And obviously, really all of these boots have really good shin protection. I'm not really even going to go too deeply into that. But the thing that you also see is there's hard plastic on the front here. So if you have something hit you, like a stick or a rock or something in the front of the boot, you are very well covered with some pretty beefy materials. All right, so moving on to the Leatt. The Leatt is, in my opinion, very close to the Gaerne. So I use both of these boots kind of interchangeably, the Gaerne and the Leatt, for hard enduro riding where I hit a lot of rocks. And I find the Leatt's a tiny little bit more comfortable, but they're very close. And the Leatt is a little bit lighter. But protection-wise, I feel very protected in the Leatt, as protected as I would in the Gaerne. And I'll kind of go through that a little bit here. So first of all, the front of the boot, it's not quite as beefy as the Gaerne, but it's beefy enough. This is all hard plastic. It's a little bit more flexible than the Gaerne, but it's still hard plastic. There's a little bit kind of an opening for a hit to happen right here, but it's pretty hard. Front of the boot is pretty protected with the buckles, hard plastic. This side of the boot around the ankle, very hard plastic. I'd say equal to the Gaerne. The inside of the boot, it's a little bit more flexible than the Gaerne, but it's still very hard plastic. The difference here is that there's this little gap right here, which gives the boot a little bit of flex, and these pieces are not quite as hard and solid as the Gaerne, but they're still very, very solid. You can smack your foot on something metal and you probably won't even feel it. All the top part is all completely surrounded in plastic. It's as beefy as the Gaerne. The back of the boot is very beefy as well. I didn't mention that on the Gaerne maybe as much, but some boots will have a kind of a full accordion style here, which we'll see again on the Tech 7. So if you hit something with the back of the boot, like again your foot peg or a stick or something like that, you can definitely cause yourself a bruise on the back of your foot. All of these super protective boots will have hard plastic all the way down, so you're very protected all the way top to bottom. The sole on the Leatt is a little bit more flexible than the Gaerne, so you can actually get and I'm sitting down, so it's kind of hard for me to put any leverage on this, but it's got a little bit of flex to it, especially in the front. Not very much, but there is a little bit. Inside, again, it's a little bit hard to show it on video, but inside there's a lot of padding, but the padding is a little bit less dense than on the Gaerne, which means it's a little bit less protective, or it feels a little bit less protective. I actually kind of like it because it makes these boots dry a lot quicker than the Gaernes. But they also, the padding on these does wear out a little bit faster, just because it's less, I wouldn't necessarily say it's less quality, but it's just different. So one thing that I forgot to mention about the Leatts is their ankle protection. So protection-wise, the ankle hinge on the Leatts is great. It limits back and forth and side-to-side movement very well. I would say that it's probably as protective as the ankle protection on the Gaernes. It's just a little bit less smooth when it comes to the actual motion. Alright, so let's move to the AlpineStars Tech7 Enduro Drystar, which are sitting kind of in the middle between the pure hardcore off-road motocross boots and an adventure boot. And they fill kind of an awesome niche in the way that they're a waterproof boot that is still protective enough to ride off-road aggressively. Immediately when you pick these up, they feel a lot less protective than kind of the more hardcore off-road, hard enduro motocross boots. Everything is a little bit lighter duty. It immediately feels lighter duty. So if you're trying to decide between one of these and SG12 and wondering about protection, these are absolutely less protective. There's no question. Anybody says that they're not, they have not compared these two side to side. And I will say comfort-wise, they're both equally comfortable when you're riding them. Personally, I can ride in either one of those and feel equally comfortable. If anything, I actually think that there's a little bit better ankle articulation in the SG12 or the Leatt than these. But let's get back to protection. So let's start from the front. Immediately, there's a much bigger kind of leather exposed area, so this is a lot more flexible. It's still pretty protected. Like, I wouldn't hesitate, hitting something with this, but it's a lot more exposed. This front piece, so you can see I can pretty much smush it. So if you have, somebody runs over your foot, you're gonna feel that. In an SG12, you would not feel that at all. Like, somebody can put their tire of their motorcycle on the front of your foot, you would not even feel it. In fact, in hard enduros, sometimes we do that. For traction, you stick your foot underneath the tire and let somebody use it as a little traction ramp. I would probably not want to do that with one of these boots, personally. So yeah, a lot more flexible. The top of the boot in general is a lot more crushable. So, you know, that is definitely a thing. Ankle, there is a lot less hard plastic. There's a little bit of plastic right here, but it's really, really flexible. Mostly there is just this kind of articulated leather stuff. It's still pretty stiff, especially the bottom part is pretty stiff, but this kind of ankle, top of the ankle part is not very stiff. So you could actually take this boot and you can kind of smush it together. So if something were to hit you in this area, you would definitely feel it. On the other side, again, there's plastic, but it's much thinner. It's probably half the thickness of the Leatt or the SG12. It's very flexible. You can see I can push it right in, which I could not do on those other boots. Same thing up top here. This is pretty flexible. This shin protection is also very, it's okay. I mean, you can kind of flex it, but yeah, there's a lot less thickness to it, which in some ways could be a good thing if you're trying to wear these inside of a pant. Like if you're using these for adventure riding and you've got pants to go over this, pants will go over these a lot easier than they will some of the more motocrossy boots. So the front, you see a lot more exposed leather here. So if you take a hit to something, it's almost 50-50 chance whether you hit plastic or whether you hit leather. So leather is a lot more flexible, and this is actually kind of hard to get the flex in the ankle here. You could see there's a little bit of a hinge setup, but it's primarily just because the boot flexes. It's not really, it's not much of a hinge. So really it's just this plastic is not thick enough to actually provide a lot of rigidity, so the entire thing will just flex. So again, it's pretty protective, not nearly as protective as those, just because there's a lot more softness to this boot as a whole. All the materials are much more lighter duty. They're pretty soft, pretty flexible, which is something that a lot of people really like about this boot. They like the ability to feel better or feel more things on the bike, like their shifter, their brake, their pegs, and they like the fact that it's a little bit lighter weight and more flexible. As far as the sole goes, again, the sole is pretty flexible. It's not super flexible in the middle here, so it's mostly just in the front. So this boot is a little bit easier to walk in, but I wouldn't say it's a massive difference from, let's say, the Leatt. So looking inside the AlpineStars padding wise, it's pretty good. I think it's pretty much on par with the Leatt. There's a lot of padding around the ankle area. It's a little bit less dense than the Gaerne padding. Gaerne uses some kind of memory foam that is really nice feeling. This is a little bit more breathable, much softer foam, which feels really nice. I don't think it will absorb impact quite as well, but on the bright side, it does breathe better and it does dry a lot faster. It's very similar feeling type of stuff to the Leatt. Okay, so finally, let's move to the Sidi Adventure, which is kind of more of a road boot. It just looks like a motocross boot. Some people will call this motocross cosplay, but I think it's actually a little bit better than a lot of adventure boots. So when I bought these, I was looking for probably like the most protective adventure riding boot I could find. I got them when the AlpineStars wasn't available yet, so this was the next best option. And right away, these are, first of all, they're a little bit shorter than like a typical enduro boot, so they don't come up as high. So you lose a little bit of protection up top. The shin plates, probably similar to AlpineStars, but again, just like when we went from the Gaerne and the Leatt to the AlpineStars, now it's probably an equal jump down in protection to this boot. It's a lot more leather, a lot more flexibility. There's a lot less plastic. We'll start at the front. The front, there's something hard kind of in the very toe area, but the entire top of this boot is very soft. So you can pretty much push it all the way in. Same thing on this portion here. There's plastic, so if you hit something kind of not very, maybe kind of pokey, but not with a lot of force, it's going to help spread that impact, and it's going to help a little bit. But this plastic is very flexible. Like you can just smush this entire boot. There's not a lot of rigidity here. It's the AlpineStars is a little bit better, but this is very flexy. There is a hinge kind of setup. It does work okay, but realistically this plastic here is so soft that it almost doesn't really provide all that much rigidity. It provides a little bit of ankle support, but you know, this is kind of just to make an analogy here. This feels to me like one of those knee braces that you buy at like a pharmacy or Walmart or something for like 25 bucks, that has a little bit of plastic on both sides of your knees, and it just provides a little bit of support, but it's not an actual brace. Like, it's not going to prevent a hyperextension or hyperflexion just because there's not enough stuff in there. Like, you can just take this entire boot and you can pretty much fold it in half if you wanted to, including all the plastic bits. So it will help, but it's not going to really save your bacon. Moving to the other side of the boot, this is where I feel like you are some pretty serious risk. This is all just leather. This is not quite as bad as the cowboy boot, but it's not great. Like, if you drop a heavy adventure bike on this part of your leg, you are not going to be happy. This is just very, very soft. This is very, very soft. It's not going to feel very good. Like, if you just graze your peg getting off the bike or something with this part, you're fine. But if you actually drop a motorcycle on this part, you're going to be pretty unhappy. Heel cups, very solid. This is actually probably the most solid part of this boot, is this piece right here. But it doesn't really extend to the ankle, so I don't really know why they did this way, but it is what it is. Again, from the back, it's pretty soft. There's this big exposed area here. This is all soft. From the front, you've got pretty wide buckles actually, so if you hit something from the front, you're pretty covered, but there's some pretty soft areas here too. The sole is very, very soft. And I think there's a little bit more. The midsole is a little harder, but the entire front of the boot is very soft. It's a little bit stiffer than your average work boot, so it's a little bit more protection than that. So inside, this inside, there's not a ton of padding. This is actually kind of my general problem with Sidi, is that they're not very padded inside typically. They try to make their boots as compact as possible, and I feel like they do that by not having a lot of padding on the inside. All right, everybody, I hope you found this comparison of the relative protectiveness of these boots helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them, and I hope to see you guys on the trail.